Hey everybody, I'm Justin with AmericanTrucks.com, and today we're taking a closer look at and actually installing the Freedom Off-Road Tubular Upper Control Arms, available for all 2004 to 2020 F-150s, equipped with a 2 to 4 inch front lift. Now, you should be checking out the Freedom Off-Road options if you'd like to grab one of the more affordable tubular options for your leveled or lifted F-150 to improve things like your ride quality, correct your ball joint angle, and prevent any binding or interference that we might be seeing with your stock upper control arms. So the big feature of the Freedom Off-Road uppers will be twofold. Now, first and foremost, you are getting a much stronger tubular upper control arm that is designed to work with F-150s that have been leveled or lifted from 2 to 4 inches. Now, they've been designed in a way to correct the angle of the ball joint when installed, and that's going to allow you to correct the overall geometry and still allowing for factory alignment specs. Now, on top of the geometry, the design of the uppers also allows for complete travel of your suspension without any binding or interference, contact by your stock upper control arm to the spring itself, which can and does happen on these aggressive front end lifts or levels. Now, your construction is also far superior here, guys, to the stamped steel stockers, due largely to the 1.5 inch tubular steel design. Now, that tubular steel is going to house things like your heavy duty ball joint, of course, here. That's gonna be the star of the show, no doubt. It is pre-greased, it's ready to rock right out of the box. Now, on top of that, you're also gonna get high performance bushings here on the body side, as well as a little bit of gusseting behind the actual ball joint itself. So should not encounter any deflection or anything like that. Now, if you do eventually wind up killing the upper ball joint here, maybe due to mileage or aggressive driving, wear and tear, whatever, you can replace the actual ball joint as needed. So always like to point that out. These aren't like a throwaway option. If you kill that ball joint, they're not done, just replace it and you're good to go. Now, the entire package has been completed in a black powder coat, and both arms, the entire thing is backed by a 1-year limited warranty, just in case you run into any issues. Now, coming in at or around that mid to low $400 price point, the Freedom options are currently going to be one of your most affordable on the site when you're looking at a fully welded tubular replacement that isn't like a stock style replacement. Now, that being said, if you don't need all of this extra beef, and you would rather stick with a stock style replacement, well, you can find a bunch of those here on the site for a heck of a lot less money from companies like OPR. Now, moving into install, guys, and keep in mind these are sold in pairs and do feature what I would call a relatively simple bolt-on install, but of course there is some elbow grease involved to get everything in place. Now, the site's gonna call this a solid 2 out of 3 wrenches on the difficulty meter, taking you a couple of hours to complete from start to finish. But what do you say we head out to the shop real quick for our detailed walkthrough and tool breakdown?
The tools you'll need for this project are a tape measure, a 1/2 inch impact gun, a 15, a 21, a 22, a 27, and a 30 millimeter socket, a 3/8 and 1/2 inch drive ratchet, an 18 and 21 millimeter wrench, a hammer, 1/2 inch breaker bar, a long pry bar, and possibly a floor jack and a set of jack stands. Hi everyone, today we're installing a set of upper control arms on our F-150, so let's get started with the uninstall first. Before we actually get the tire removed and get the vehicle lifted up in the air, we're going to want to measure the distance between the center of the wheel and the bottom of the fender here. And the reason for this is because when we put the new control arms back in, we want to make sure that they're back in the same position as what the factory control arms are. So to do that, we're going to go ahead and measure, like I said, between the center of the wheel here to the bottom of the fender. And we've got 26.5 inches right now. So that's where we're going to want it when we put the new control arms back in. So let's go ahead and get our vehicle raised and get our wheel removed. So now that we've got our vehicle supported on our lift, which by the way, you can do this job while the vehicle is on the ground on a set of jack stands and using a floor jack. First thing we're going to want to do after we've got our wheel off and our vehicle supported is disconnect our outer tie rod end from the steering knuckle. To do that, we're going to use our 21 millimeter socket and break that loose. Now with our nut removed, you may need to use a hammer to dislodge the shaft from the tie rod end from the steering knuckle. To do that, we're just going to wrap a couple of times on the steering knuckle here, and then we'll tap the bottom of the tie rod end. And you see it broke it loose. Now we can just lift it out and get it out of the way. Now we'll disconnect the sway bar end link and then our steering knuckle. Now using our 18mm wrench, we'll go ahead and take this nut off the top of our sway bar end link here, so it'll give us a little bit more movement with our lower control arm to remove our strut. Now, since our vehicle already has a lift installed on it, our upper control arm is not a factory stock control arm. Now, if you've got a factory stock on yours, you should have a flat steel type of control arm, whereas we've got the tubular on ours. So the process is basically the same, it's just going to look a little bit different. Now on the stock upper control arm, to release the ball joint, you're just going to take a 21mm socket and remove this nut. Now you may also have a fitting on the end of the shaft of this ball joint that's going to have a 10mm wrench that will fit it. You may or may not need to use that to hold that shaft still when you remove the nut. If you do, then you'll have to use a 10mm wrench and a 21mm socket to remove that nut. So we'll go ahead and remove our cotter pin here and then take our nut off and get these two separated. So let's go ahead and get that done. So we're going to use a pair of needle nose pliers to squeeze the end of the cotter pin together so that we can pull it out the other side. Now with the cotter pin removed, we'll go ahead and use our socket. So now we'll go ahead and use our wrench and loosen this nut. And we're not going to take it all the way off just yet, because as you can see, there's a gap now between the nut and the steering knuckle. So we need to separate the ball joint from the steering knuckle. And we're going to do that just like what we did with the tie rod end. We're going to use our hammer and tap on the top of the steering knuckle here, and that should free everything up. As you can see, it's now separated. Now we can go ahead and finish taking off the nut. Now you can just set that out of the way for right now, just so we can access the lower support bolt for our strut and our upper nuts on the top of the strut. Now with our steering knuckle out of the way, we can go ahead and remove the upper nuts on our strut here. And to do that, we'll be using our 15mm socket, and then we'll remove the lower strut support bolt below so that we can actually get the strut out of the way, so we'll have access to the two bolts inside here for the control arm itself. So let's go ahead and get these three nuts off the top using our 15mm socket. So our lower strut mount bolt is right here underneath our axle, and there's a 30 millimeter nut here on this side and a 27 millimeter on the other side, and it's right at the very bottom of our strut. Now at this point, you're going to need a pry bar to get underneath the bottom of the strut here and just kind of pry it up, and it'll force the lower control arm down enough to get that lower part of the strut out. Once you get the lower part of the strut out, then the top will just come right down. Now, we'll go ahead and push our control arm out of the way so you can see the bolt. But you see the bolt, one bolt right here, and then there's another one on the other side here, and there's a nut on the outside. So we're going to use our socket, our 21 millimeter socket on the inside, and a 21 millimeter wrench on the outside, and get this front bolt removed. Now we'll do the same thing for the rear bolt. Now we can just pull our control arm straight out. Now to install our new control arm, we're basically going to reverse the process of what we used to uninstall it. So we're going to go ahead and slide our new control arm in place. And then we'll insert our two bolts that we originally took out. Now we go ahead and put our original nuts back on the ends. Now at this point, we're going to go ahead and tighten them up using our 21 millimeter socket and our 21 millimeter wrench. Now we're not going to tighten this all the way down yet, we're just going to snug it up so that we can go ahead and set the ride height like what we measured from before to 23.5 inches. So we're just going to snug this up right now so it'll stay in place. Now we'll go ahead and reconnect our steering knuckle to our control arm. Now as you can tell, we've already lowered our vehicle down so that we can check our measurement between the center of the axle here and the bottom of the fender. That's so that we can put our control arm back in the proper position after we get it installed. So we'll go ahead and measure. And right now we're at about 26 3/4. So we're about 1/4 inch too low right now. So what we'll do is we'll go ahead and raise this up the extra 1/4 inch and then tighten down our control arm so that we can go ahead and get our strut installed. So there's our 26.5 inches. So we'll tighten our control arm down with our 22 millimeter socket. We'll double check our measurement. And we're at 26. Our upper control arm bolts using our 21 millimeter socket and our 21 millimeter wrench. And then we'll take this apart again so that we can slide our strut back into place. Now we'll go ahead and disconnect our steering knuckle again. That way we can swing it out of the way and go ahead and install our strut. Now we'll go ahead and lower our jack. All right, now that we've got our control arm locked into place, we can go ahead and reinstall our strut. Now this will take a little bit of effort on your part just because of the way that it goes back in. So just make sure that you've got your studs lined up correctly with the holes at the top of the tower. And then we'll just squeeze it in. Then we're going to attach one of the nuts on the top just to hold it in place. Now we can go ahead and insert the lower end of our strut back into the lower control arm. And for that, you will need your pry bar. What we're going to do is we're going to stick this underneath the strut and into the lower control arm, and then just work our way back in so that we can install the lower strut bolt. So underneath the strut, on the edge of the lower control arm. Now we go ahead and install our lower strut mount bolt. And attach the nut to the other side. Now we're ready to go ahead and connect our steering knuckle back to our upper control arm. And for this, again, you're going to need your pry bar to lift up on that control arm to get it into place. Now with the ball joint inside your steering knuckle, you may want to use your pry bar just to pull down on it a little bit, give you a little bit extra room for the washer and the nut to grab it. And now we'll go ahead and tighten up our nut. And to tighten our nut, we're going to be using our 22 millimeter socket. And we go ahead and put our other 2 nuts on the top of our strut. And we'll tighten those down with our 15mm socket. Now we'll go ahead and reconnect our outer tie rod in. Reattach the original nut and tighten it down with our 21mm socket. And finally, reattach our sway bar and tighten it down with our 18mm wrench. And now that we've got the driver's side done, you can repeat that whole process for the other side. And as always, anytime you do any kind of suspension work in the front, make sure that you tighten everything down to factory recommended torque specifications, and then before you actually try and take it out and drive it, make sure you schedule an alignment to make sure everything is where it needs to be before you take it down the road. And that wraps up our review and install of the Freedom Off-Road front upper control arms for the 2 to 4 inch lift for your 04 to 20 F-150 excluding Raptor. Thanks for watching, and remember, for all things F-150, keep it right here at AmericanTrucks.com.